Okay,
Yeah.
well, I think we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order then. So let's do that, Debbie. If you would note attendance, please.
Noted.
Okay, well, first up, we've got our agenda review. You've all hopefully had a chance to look at it. It's pretty straightforward tonight. We've got board training scheduled for, I'm going to just say approximately 2 hours. And then we've got a couple of other items that we've added because they're timely. We're going to get an update on Division 22 standards, and we'll have a first reading of policy ACB, the All Students Belong. That's everything we've got currently on the agenda, but this is our opportunity to discuss that if there's any concerns or amendments that might need to be made. Yes.
Do you see me? Thank you. Oh, did someone else speak?
No, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to make an amendment to, or I'd like to propose an amendment to the agenda for tonight right before we adjourn. I was hoping that we could add other items just for this meeting. I have a summary that I'd like to read that has to do with the last board meeting that I wasn't able to attend. And I just wanted to read a quick summary about that meeting and the topics that were discussed. Would that be agreeable with everybody?
You want to talk to the board about the meeting, or you want to talk to?
No, I'm just making a summary statement of what I watched the meeting from October 12th. And I just wanted to, you know, I just have a summary that I wanted to read about the meeting. It's all positive. It's just thanking the members from the public and, you know, SFEA, things like that. Just to, since I missed the meeting, I just thought I would have a little summary to, you know, express. And I'd like that to be added before we adjourn quick at the end of the meeting.
Okay, so I'll take that as a motion to add other items. Specifically, Shelley would like to make a summary statement since she was unable to do so at the last meeting.
Right.
Is that a good summary of what you're asking?
That is correct. Yes, that is correct. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so moved. Any? Yes, Lori.
Oh, nothing.
Oh,
No.
I thought I saw you. I'm sorry. Okay.
No.
Is there? Do I hear any seconds? Anybody?
I can second that motion.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Okay. Debbie, why don't you go ahead and take the vote, please?
Jonathan?
I'll vote yes.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Janet?
Yes.
Lori?
Yes.
And Shelley? Yes. And Irv?
Yes.
Thank you. All in favor.
Okay. So,
Thank you.
okay, so the revised draft agenda is now to include the item that we just discussed. I would accept a motion to approve that meeting or that meeting agenda.
I'd like to make a, oh, go ahead.
Nope. I will move to approve the agenda as revised.
So moved.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Okay, Debbie, would you please take that call?
Jonathan? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Janet?
Yes.
Lori?
Yes.
Shelley? Yes. And Irv?
Yes.
Thank you. All in favor.
All right, thanks everybody. So our first item is board training, and Renee is going to lead tonight and take us away. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you guys inviting me back again. And after our training last month, and there was like so many questions about point of order and how do we do this and how do we do that, that I asked for permission to deviate a little bit from the required curriculum of the transition plan to enact your guarantee for the superintendent search services. And it was agreed because I wanted to talk to you about your meetings and the efficiency of your meetings, how democratic your meetings are, and I just wanted us to just really have a robust conversation about making your meetings productive, working for all of you. And so Jonathan agreed that we could, have this conversation about your meetings. It's an important part of your work with your new superintendent for sure. But I just thought that I picked up on a fair amount of angst and how do we do this? And are we doing this right? And what's the best way for us to conduct our meetings? That I just thought it might be of value to you to spend a little bit of time on that. And then when Sarah comes back next month and works with you, or whenever you schedule that, it's been monthly so far, so I made a presumption. But that she can continue on with the curriculum for the transition plan. So with your permission, I do have a PowerPoint to just use as a guide, but I really just want this to be much more conversational than me presenting information to you. I want this to be about Silver Falls, about what you need. And so what I have on the slides is a lot of really good basic information. In fact, these slides are really old, actually. And I just took some work that Betsy Miller-Jones, if any of you are around long enough to know Betsy, but she was a trainer for OSBA, then became executive director, and now is retired. But anyway, these were slides left over that Betsy had done. And so I'm bringing them to you tonight to talk about your meetings. We want all your meetings to be successful, of course, and don't want you to have a bad use of your time. Nobody volunteers on a school board to be frustrated, to leave a meeting feeling like that was a total waste of my time. You all signed up to get on the school board because you have something that you want to bring to your community, to your schools. You want to make a positive contribution. And so that's why you signed up for this abuse called board meetings. I'm just teasing on that, this abuse part. Because sometimes I know I've left my meetings and it's like, oh my God, why am I doing this? But most of the time I knew why I was doing this, and I kept it up for 9.5 years and only resigned to move out of state. So, so please just take your microphones off when you need to and speak up. I can see a few of you at a time, but I can't see all of you at a time. So just interrupt. It really, really doesn't bother me at all. So let's talk about some of the things that make up a successful meeting. First thing is it really needs to be board work. I have sat through my share of board meetings that they're talking about everything under the sun, but not necessarily board work. And if you're having conversations about things that are not necessarily board work, but things that are going on inside the district, that's okay. Just keep a perspective of being able to distinguish between what really is board work and what's not board work. Need to think about your participation as individual members. You all have an equal voice on the board. The chair has extra responsibilities, but you all have an equal voice. And so you need to be sure that everybody's participation is actually effective. And so we're going to talk about some things like, and I think you guys mentioned this last time from the webinar that was on the round robin or the speaking chart. That's what you talked about a lot last time, was like this speaking chart. But being sure that everybody's voice is heard in board meetings. Then of course, the presiding officer has some responsibilities, like I said, that are a little different than everybody else's, and how you can be the most effective about that, with that. Talking about procedures for transacting routine business. And I know you guys use a consent agenda, right? That's, yeah, I'm seeing some nodded heads. So that's one efficient procedure for transacting routine business. There can be some others, and hopefully we'll talk about them tonight too, and see if you can put them into place. I know you guys are trying to do this one. You're trying to understand the rules of order, because there was a lot of questions about this last time that I was with you. Obviously, you want to be in legal compliance. Nobody wants to not be, and you guys in particular have learned some difficult lessons to ensure that you're in legal compliance. And so I know it's very much aware on all of your minds there in Silver Falls. And then your record keeping. A lot of this falls on Debbie, this top part, good record keeping and minutes, and then keeping the policy books and whatnot up to date. But it also, record keeping for the chair to keep track of who has spoken, who hasn't spoken, who do you need to be sure you draw into the conversation. And then when you're speaking on behalf of the board, it's clear and authoritative and they know that it's you. This is why I felt comfortable about bringing this into the transition plan, because a successful meeting means there's a mutually supportive relationship with your superintendent. And I know that you want that after the last 3 years that you've had. I know you want to have a good relationship with Scott and you want to have him stay with you. Understand your procedures for your policy making and your other board functions, and then understand your public participation so that it's orderly, democratic, and mostly so it's constructive. And so those are ingredients of a successful meeting. But what are the symptoms of an ineffective meeting? So this is where I want you to kind of take your microphones off and share with me some of your struggles, what's going on that we can perhaps address tonight if you feel comfortable in bringing that up, because I don't have a list for this one. I think one symptom, I'll throw this out to you because I saw it last time. I think one symptom of an ineffective board meeting is when you have to call point of order on each other often. I think that's a symptom that it's ineffective. Something is breaking down inside your system when you don't know the rules, and so therefore your meetings are being ineffective, or you think people are breaking the rules, so you have to call out a point of order. Are there other items that you can think of that might be causing some of your board meetings to be less effective than they could be? Or am I just totally off base here and thinking this is a conversation for your board to have?
Yeah, I'll volunteer one. I think sometimes we end up in circular or repetitive conversations. So I'm not sure if that is or isn't a symptom, but I'll throw it out there and get your feedback on it.
Okay. I wrote it down.
I have one, I mentioned this before, and I think it's been addressed to a certain extent by our adding the agenda review and then the other items. And that is that if people didn't feel that they had a time to be able to discuss something that was important to them, it would inevitably happen at a time that it probably wasn't appropriate. And then that was frustrating for others, I think, because it felt off topic or it felt, irrelevant or whatever. And so making sure there are those designated opportunities, I think helps us all then stay on task and stay on subject.
So just a clarifying question on that, Janet, is this, are you talking about items that are not necessarily on the agenda? Because you have your agenda, you can go item to item to item to talk about things.
Mm-hmm.
So in what aspect are people not being able to talk about things at like an appropriate time?
I think in large part, and I'll let others chime in here too, but I think in large part, there were items that weren't on the agenda, but there was a certain amount of momentum and energy behind them because they were timely or they were on people's minds. And again, this is sort of coming from a period of upheaval that we were all in, right? So it may have been as symptomatic of just the time we were in as anything else, but I think that was largely it. But I'll let others who maybe experienced that for themselves and felt that frustration, speak to that a little bit more if needed.
Thank you. This helps me in knowing how to kind of target some of the conversations in the list of agendas. So thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Janet. Others?
I would agree with Janet that I believe that often when we have meetings, I look at it as we have the agenda, which is kind of the trunk of the tree. And as we discuss things, limbs, branches develop. And although we want to keep things on task, sometimes the heart of what's on that agenda tends to lend itself to another branch of conversation that we might not have considered in the moment of the agenda, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that there are times, most times, when we should, as a board, have that freedom to speak, because when else do we get to? When we have meetings, this is our opportunity as a board to speak freely and to provide our opinion. And so I'd like to see a little bit better balance of that. There have been a few meetings when I felt a constraint. And I'd like to, as a board, work on that.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you, Lori. All right, we'll move forward with those three. I'm certainly open to others sharing anything that comes up. Like was just pointed out by Janet, sometimes you don't realize you need to talk about something until there's a trigger. And then something in the meeting triggers a thought. So as we're moving through these slides, and I did write these down so that I can interject where I feel like the answers to them would be more appropriate as we're moving through this material. Other things come up, please, please, please take your mics off and let's have a conversation about it. Okay, gotta find my mouse, there we go. So tonight's topics that I had planned include talking about why your meetings matter, not just that you legally have to have them, but why do you have them? What makes a successful meeting? We talked about those ingredients already, but looking at that in a little bit more detail. Planning for the meetings, which involves room setup, and then your agendas, which are big, and we've talked about that quite a bit already. And then going about conducting the meeting, actually when it's happening and you're in it, and the business that takes place, which is where most of these items came from, that you guys just brought to me to talk about and have some attention given to tonight. How do you follow up from meetings? Interestingly, Shelley wanted to do that. She wanted to follow up on a meeting that she missed. And then what are you, each of you, the 6 of you, since Tom's absent tonight, willing to do? And then that also then involves Dan and Scott and Debbie. In how they are going to play a part in integrating your meetings too. So kind of on them as well. So your board's purpose is, I'd like you to take 1 or 2 minutes and kind of make a list of items for yourself. What is it that you believe is your board's purpose? And we are going to transition from sharing this to sharing my screen where I can write down your items. So you guys take a minute or two and list out why your meetings are important, why they matter. Heard some pin movement. I'm not hearing it now. It's been a little over a minute. I don't want to rush you, but I also don't want to draw this out too long. Looks like most of you are looking up. So what I have on the screen here is, it's like a Post-it note program that I can type down in real time what you say to me, and you guys can all see what my typing is like when somebody's watching and talking. But I just thought that it would be kind of nice to get all of your perspectives out here where everybody can see. And if we need to, I can make this, you know, bigger so that we have lots of space. I was just remembering your names earlier in the day. So there's no particular order to this. This was just the order in which I remembered and got your names typed. So if you'd like to start, Janet, we can start with you, but if you don't want to, we can go with somebody else.
I'm fine. Do you just want one from me to start with?
Well, how many do you have?
I have 4. 2 of them are pretty predictable, but I mean, I can give you as many or as few as you want.
Let's start with one and go through the list. Obviously, no Tom, and then we'll and then if somebody says, well, that was already on my list or whatever, then we can somehow designate that. So what's your, maybe your number one that you're just dying to get on the list?
So I would say that to provide a solid foundation, and that's not really the right word, we're almost like the hub for the superintendent in the sense that we stand still and we're solid, and he or she, he in this case, can circle around and do all of the things that need to be done, but we're steady and solid and predictable in the sense of how we operate. Not sometimes our decisions might be unexpected, but at least how we operate and our communication and all that is consistent. So just a solid foundation from which to be able to do his job.
So did I capture that okay?
Yes.
Who would like to go next? Great start, Janet. We want to go down the list. Would that be more helpful? Would it be easier to keep track since no Tom? Lori, do you have anything you would like to share?
It's along the same lines as Janet. I believe that if we can have consistent communication, that would be very helpful in that we allow everyone to provide their opinion.
Shelley, thank you, Lori.
I think the first one that I'll go with is, first and foremost, I think that the board's purpose is to set, modify, or update policy for the district in order for the superintendent to be able to take those policies and implement them throughout the district. So that's number one. And then I have 3 more, but
Yeah.
that's one of the purposes, I believe.
Okay, Irv, do you have some items to share with us or an item to start?
Well, yeah, I mean, they've already been talked about, but my number one was actually policy overview / update, support superintendent. So they basically have already been talked about, so.
Cool. Well, it's important to hear you say it though, because it creates some ownership for you too. So thank you for sharing that. Now we've made the list down to Jennifer.
I will say accountability in the management of resources directed towards improving student performance.
Ready for mine?
I am. Thanks, John.
I will. So a lot of these are similar, but I guess what I'll start with is reflecting the community in oversight and approaches. So basically that we are the sort of the voice of the community and how this all works, really.
Very good. And so we said that there was, just for the sake of space, but no other reason, I'm just going to delete Tom off of here. Not removing him from your board, but just to give us a little more space. And like I said, if we need to, we can do it like this too. So I heard Lori say that hers was similar to Janet, and Shelley was indicating that there were some that were similar, and Irv did that as well. So if you have something on your list that has not been stated yet by somebody, can we add another item from your list? So Janet, you said you had 4 originally, or Jennifer, are you wanting to go? You have your hand raised?
Sure, I'll just add another one. The selection and supervision of the superintendent.
Then it sounded like, Janet, you were ready to go, and then I saw Jennifer's hand. Were you ready to go, Janet?
Yeah, that's okay. So this one might be contentious. This might be, I know that our meetings are not for the public per se, but I think that one of the important functions of the board is to bring some transparency to the functioning of the district. And I think its meetings serve as one way to communicate information out to the public about how the district is run and how we make our decisions. I think there's sort of an important educational role there. I think having that opportunity to talk to the community, or at least have them listen to our meetings, is really important. And I know, we're not presenting to them. That's not the point, but I think the function ends up being, to a certain extent, wrapped up in that.
Thank you. Did I capture it okay? Sometimes I try and summarize those long statements.
And I ramble, so no, you did great.
All right, Lori, did you have any additional?
Not at this time.
Okay, Shelley, how about you? And then I see your hand, Irv.
Yeah, I actually, it's kind of, in addition to what Janet just said, I'm going to kind of hopefully add on to that. In my mind, our job on this board is to have healthy, detailed discussion in an open meeting setting.
Right.
Any ideas, any thought processes, any decisions that might want to be made, anything. If there's a training that we need to go to, if there's anything, erring on the side of caution, to bring all of it to the board in an open session so we can decide as a board together. And because this is where we're supposed to do all of our work. And I think when I reflect on the time I've been on here, I see that there's decisions or things being done that that don't include the whole board. And I feel like, if we're supposed to speak as one group, then we need to have everything come to the board and speak about it in public as one group. I wish I could put that in all capital letters on a sign. Just bring it all to the board and let us all hear it. And then we make a decision together. in public.
Okay, Irv, thank you, Shelley. Irv, you
You're
had your
welcome.
hand raised.
Yeah, collect data and then assess data.
Jennifer, you added a second already. Jonathan, did you have a second?
It's similar to some others, but we are a check and balance with the administration, right? So there's, there is a role that we play there.
So we have at least 2 items from each of you, and I want to give anybody who has any remaining items they would like to get up here on the list to share out what those might be. Although Lori doesn't have to, she chose to pass. So does anybody have anything else that they would like to get up onto this list?
I've got a couple
If
things.
Jennifer was speaking to fiscal oversight in general or just specifically, but obviously we are responsible for making sure that the district is being managed in a fiscally responsible way.
Yeah.
So if that's already captured in there, then that's great.
So there was some duplication in this list, and there was also some items that were mentioned by, like only one person, like Irv. And it's fine, you guys might agree with it, but Irv was like, collect the data, then assess the data. I don't think that was really a lot different than Shelley's like, bring all the information to the board in an open meeting and let us decide together, because information and data can be similar. And I did this in part because unless we talk about what our purposes are or what we see as our purpose, then how can we ever develop a shared purpose? Because one of the things that I have learned in all of my years of working with school boards is when school boards have a shared purpose, they're able to focus on that. And then the stuff that, the pretty shiny things that want to distract us are less distracting when we are able to, focus on our shared focus. So are there any other items that we would like to get on the list? And then let's have some kind of conversations around what of these that we share and how they can play into your functioning so you can have effective meetings. Are there other items?
I've got a few, Renee, and some of them are related to what other people said. I think Irv talked about the data, and that was part of my overarching idea of making sure that resources are used in order to effectively used to improve student achievement. So I just wanted to add, I mean, you don't have to add anything. I just wanted to say that I felt like that was an important part too. Nobody's mentioned the mission or the direction of the district as far as board work. And also the adjudication of policy. That's one of our rules, is to be that judicial branch. And I also have connection to the Silver Falls School District community, which happens outside of board meetings a lot of times when we're talking to people who have questions or want to get involved or have complaints. We kind of lend that transparency that Janet spoke about. And Janet, I didn't think that what you said was controversial at all. I think that was really, that is our role, is to serve as, one of those people that connects the district to the community. And then did I mention collective governance?
The collaborative governance, you mean?
So, yeah, collaborative governance, that's the word.
So, great list here, guys. I wish I could invite you to come into this and be able to like put your little stamps of approval. You know how you do those sessions where everybody's got little red dots? And they're able to go around because I would like to be able to use some of this conversation around the purpose of your meetings to help narrow into a shared purpose, because they all filter into what you should be doing as a board. They all fit each one of these in different conversations that you're having as a purpose for your board meetings. So I'm not seeing anything here that gives me any kind of pause or concern. The piece about transparency is your meetings are all out in the open except for executive sessions.
Right.
You know, you can't have meetings that are not accessible to the public to watch and hear your meetings. And so the transparency of the district by you is one that in my 25 years of doing board work, I don't quite understand, in all honesty, because your board work, your governance work, the policy update, the support for the superintendent, ensuring all the resources, and taking in the input from the community regarding the decisions that you're going to be able to make. I don't know how that balances with the quote transparency of the district. Can we talk about that just a little bit more so I can better understand what that intention is?
I'll just speak on what I was thinking about. Obviously, the meetings are public, but there are times where I feel like it's important to repeat something for the benefit of the public, or ask questions of the superintendent that, you know, hopefully I've talked to him ahead of time and said, hey, I know the answer to the question, but would you mind if I asked it in public? So it gives you an opportunity to maybe let our community know where we're at with this. And obviously you don't want to spend the whole meeting on that because then you get away from doing your business. But I think sometimes there are times where you over discuss for the benefit of having it on the record or for the benefit of those who are trying to, you know, get informed and stay up to speed. And that's where I think I said it can be contentious because obviously that can run away from you.
I think I'm understanding a little bit more. So kind of like in the superintendent's reports part that you might ask for greater clarification around this or that, whatever it is. Like if Title IX comes up here in the next little while because of Dan's attendance at that session today and again tomorrow, and it's going to impact your policy, then you would probably have a bit more of an in-depth discussion around what the district is doing in respect to Title IX, which would be district operations. You would have the policy decision, but the implementation, how the district puts Title IX into practice, that conversation is a type of transparency that you're talking about. Am I understanding that? Okay.
And I guess I would add to that because I think that when Janet said that, talked about transparency, I think I was thinking even more broadly that people do come to us and ask or complain or have concerns or whatever. And oftentimes I'll say, go to this meeting on this date, and this is how that process works. And so that is to me a transparency of the government or governance of what the school board's doing.
Thank you. Thank you. How does that resonate with the rest of you?
Yeah, I just really quick, I want to piggyback actually on Janet and Jennifer. That is exactly right, what they have said. You know, there have been times where I have asked the superintendent, you know, we talked about this on the phone. Can you elaborate for us? And that information is, and I feel that, you know, we've already talked on the phone. We both agree that that information is good to share, you know, in the public, and it just builds trust. It builds a level of, look, we talked about this on the phone. We feel that we would like to have it in public, and we're gonna talk about it, right? Even if it's, you know, questions or whatever. I have done the same thing that Janet and especially Jennifer has, you know, guided people with factual information. Here's a meeting, go talk to the superintendent. That's going to be at the next board meeting and such. Yeah, I see exactly what they're saying, but sometimes it's hard to put it in words to try to explain it.
Well, and I appreciate all of you trying to do this, because there's a fair amount of district work that can't be publicly shared. I mean,
Right.
personnel issues can't be publicly
Right.
shared. Student learning
Right.
issues can be shared with their parent or
Yeah.
legal guardian,
Yeah.
but you know, you can't put that in if there's, particularly when there's public things that happen. And, you know, I know it's just so different right now with like kids not in school, but you know, say something happens like at a football game, you know, and like everybody knows what happened. And so everybody wants to talk about this, but you can't talk about it.
No.
You know, it involves whom it involves, and any disciplinary action can't be discussed unless it's ever appealed up to a board hearing, that adjudication piece, which I hope I spelled that right. In Jennifer's comment about the board, you know, the board's purpose. So I think that you are all on a similar mind of your meetings, and this is going to help us then when we continue to talk through. I can save this and I can send this to you, but I have to like stop sharing it in order to go back to the other thing. But it didn't go away; it's still out there on the internet, and I can take a picture of it and share it with you. So thank you for talking about that and sharing your purpose. And I don't want to take too much more time. It's already 10 to 8 and I want to keep moving forward. I think this was a really good conversation to get all of us focused on why are we having these meetings? Well, it's to do all of those things. So let's have the most effective meeting as we possibly can. Now, I know your boardroom, when you're physically meeting in the district office, is already pretty well set, but these are just some ideas that other researchers have talked about ways to set up board meetings and what is the most conductive seating arrangement for a board meeting. And it really is whatever is going to work for the purpose of the meeting is the best seating arrangement. And so I don't want to like spend too much time on this, but I know that when I was board chair, initially that first one is kind of the curve was kind of how we had it set up. It was more like a U, but kind of like that, but a little more squared U. And I sat in the middle as the board chair, and I felt like I was in a tennis or a ping pong match, because in order to watch everything that was going on and trying to manage the meeting, I felt like I was just kind of always having to turn my head to see what was happening and get, you know, people get my attention. And then I changed and I said, I'm not doing this anymore. And I sat at the end, and our meeting was actually like, it changed then to just become like an L shape instead of the U shape. And I sat at the very far end so I could see everybody down the table. I could see everybody at the L, and I could see all of the audience, because it was much easier for me to run a meeting where I could see everything and see everybody, and I didn't have to be turning my head all the time. So seating arrangement is something to think about in your meeting and the kind of meeting that you want to have and the kind of conversations you want to have, because not all meetings are business meetings like tonight. So it all starts with setting the agenda, and you guys have that policy, and I know you're already following it, and I know that you're already doing it, but having a really good agenda makes the meetings go much more easy. So if you want to have an efficient board meeting, you need to have an efficient agenda. Stephen Covey, who does a lot of work on time management and being effective, he's got some ways to think about this different aspects of your board work and when you're thinking about them. And so, for example, urgent and important work, those you have to do it. You have to act right now. It can't wait. And your action in some way contributes to the priorities and beliefs of the district. And then there's those areas that require leadership activity, but you need to talk about. So these are kind of some of the things that I heard coming up that were, I think it was Lori's example, that we have the trunk of the tree and then these branches come off. So these items come up, they're important, but they're not necessarily urgent. And so when you're having conversations about those kinds of things, you might need to check yourself and say, you know what, I didn't think about that until you brought this up. And now that this topic has been brought up, it occurs to me that maybe we should be talking about this because this is important. It relates to our mission, but you know what? It's not on the agenda tonight. It's not urgent. Let's see if we can add this to a future agenda. So that is one of the things that you can do, to think about your work. This other one here is it really board work? Did you have something you want to say, Shelley?
Yeah, really quick, just response to that. So when that has happened before, and there's been people on the board that have called a point of order, and it's not the discussion in my mind, because there are so many different personalities and thought processes on our board, it's so vitally important to hear those ideas and those thought processes. And sometimes it does get off a little bit, but sometimes it's also a part of the robust discussion of that topic. And when it gets off a little bit, like you just said, it's a part of it. You can do that, but then people call a point of order. And it just creates this tension. It creates this like, well, what? Okay. I've seen it happen. And it can get very frustrating when, you have such a diverse group of people who want to see it go a certain way, and they also want to see it go, and the other people want to go another way. And that's where I think we're having some issues, is the lack of respect for all of our thought processes. And not calling a point of order and saying, okay, yeah, that's a good idea. I didn't know that. Having different responses to make it proactive. That's what I needed to respond to you about, because it's real. It's happened many times.
And I can see how that can happen. 9.5 years on my board, we certainly diverged from topics. Yeah.
Right.
It does happen, but it also means let's agree to put a check on ourselves, each one of us, like in that agenda, and that last item is what will you do? So maybe the 7 of you can agree to put a check on yourself when you're seeing a topic emerge, a branch is starting to form from the trunk of the agenda that nobody anticipated, but it's like, oh, well, okay. Can we make an agreement that we're going to jot those things down and bring them back up on the trunk of an agenda?
Yeah.
Because they're important, but they're not urgent. So you don't have to talk about them that night just because they come up in your mind that night.
Right.
And so somebody can be responsible for jotting those down, maybe Debbie, perhaps in that secretary role, that, the topics that arise but aren't fully addressed. And then she can have that list and it's ongoing. It might be kind of hard for Jonathan to do that, or whomever is a chair moving forward, but this year, Jonathan, to try and still keep track of where the board is and write down where it wants to go in the future. Might be a little much for him in presiding over the meeting. But if you can all just put recognize what's happening. Yes, this is important. We need to talk about this. But do we really need to talk about it tonight? Can kind of be your question. Lori, you're leaning in like you.
Yeah, I think sometimes, like, I've been in what I felt were good meetings and information would come up, and then lo and behold, I, hypothetically could receive an email that was incredibly inappropriate, in my opinion. And I would even argue, would point out my ability to speak and provide my opinion. And, I really find that to be unfortunate that still occurs. I think one of the positive things that we're doing is going straight to the superintendent about topics for the agenda. And I think as a board member, you're doing your best to walk a fine line, but you should feel confident enough to say what you believe at the moment without feeling you're going to be chastised or whatever afterwards.
Retaliated against?
What?
Retaliated against?
Boy, that's a strong one.
That's a strong one.
It is. It's strong, but I think board members have to respect each other enough and know that we are all equal, and that none of us have the right to tell each other what we can say and not to say. And I think this board has quite a bit of growth to do. We've come out of a tumultuous few years, and I think there's still some rather unfortunate mindsets that people must feel are still effective. And it does border, in my opinion, on bullying and fear mongering, and it's unnecessary. So I think for the board to respect each other and their opinion, that's much needed. And I do feel that there's a check and balance with that as well. So I still feel that we're working on our foundation as a board to move forward in that manner.
And I agree with that, Lori, which is some of what I picked up on last time that Sarah and I were working with all of you. And that's why I wanted to have a conversation about your meetings, because you were right, whomever it was that said this is the only place you can do your work, because it's true. Yeah. Anytime a board gets together, it has to, it's a meeting. Unless you're touring schools, you can tour schools, without it being a meeting. But
right.
When you guys are together, it's a meeting, and that's the only way you can work. And so you need to work out the agreements around how your meeting is going to be conducted. And so I really like the idea of like a speaking chart, or as parliamentarians tend to call it, a round robin process, so that whatever topic is up for discussion, that you go around. And you don't get to speak a second time until everybody has had a chance to speak a first time, so that we don't get into this back and forth between just a couple of board members capitalizing and monopolizing, actually, and the board meeting. And so it's a responsibility of the presiding officer to ensure that everybody has a chance to talk. At the same time, what people are saying needs to be germane to the topic at hand. So whatever is that item on the agenda that is being discussed, then whatever is coming out of the mouths of the board members participating really should be about that item on the agenda. It needs to be germane to that. And if a branch sprouts up from that, Debbie will take a note on that and we'll say, okay, yep, that's important. It contributes to our mission. It contributes to our goals. It's not on the agenda tonight. It's not urgent. So let's make a note of that. And then it'll be in this list that Debbie will keep for future meetings. And going to the superintendent with your agenda items in the first place is your policy. That is what you are supposed to do if you want items on an agenda. And then you have to be sure that what you're talking about really is board work. And so the top two up here, urgent / important, not urgent, important, are board work. The bottom two, urgent, not important, not urgent, not important, are not board work. Well, there may be some items that require board action down in the urgent, not important, but those are more the housekeeping kinds of things. They don't really contribute to your mission, your beliefs, your goals of educating kids. But it's like, I don't know, this might sound bad, but it's like Division 22 assurances. You know, you got to do them. You have to review them. You got to say that the district is in compliance with Division 22. So that is important. It's not really urgent. It's important, but you know, I don't know, maybe a bad example. Because it's a legal compliance thing. And if your district's out of compliance of Division 22, then you're making sure that they will be in compliance. So maybe that's not a good example, but I appreciate that the conversation you're having. And I think that two things might help this. One, recognizing when branches are forming and making a collective agreement to put those on a list to discuss at a future meeting. And the second thing that might really help you is having like that speaking chart. And you can change up the order so that it's not always the same order, like my list of things on that where I was typing your purpose statements. I had an order, but you can search and change up the order. So you're not always calling on the same people first, and make it up. Make sure that everybody has a chance to talk before anybody else can talk a second time.
Hey, Renee.
So,
you know, when you talk about things like speaking chart, I mean, is that something that the board decides as a board, or is that something the chair is supposed to implement as chair? I'm not really clear, and I'd like your guidance on that.
It's just a guide for you to use as a presiding officer to ensure everybody's had a chance to talk. So if you have a list for with everybody's name down the side, you know, all of that, and maybe across the top you can have the different, I don't know, however you want to do this, but in some way for like each agenda item, you can make a little check mark or something, or a number one next to, so like if Jennifer spoke first on whatever it was, there's some topic and Jennifer shared her opinion on it, you would put a little hash mark next to Jennifer's name for that item, that Jennifer has spoken about this. And then before you ever move on to another item as a presiding officer, you just make sure that everybody else has had a chance to talk before Jennifer wants to talk a second time. So it's a tool for you basically as a presiding officer to ensure that everybody has had an opportunity to have their voice heard. So that's all that it really is. And that's really what the round robin is as well. It's just the same thing. You know, it's just making sure everybody has a chance to be heard in a meeting.
So I have a response to that actually. You know, I gotta say that Jonathan, he actually really already does that. Every time we have a topic of discussion and whatnot, you know, he always, you know, puts out there, you know, this is the time to discuss. This is, you know, does anybody have anything to say? Does anybody have anything else to say? Does anybody, you know, he always gives that opportunity for sure. I mean, and it's always been a staple of his when we're talking about anything. And the other thing is that I'm totally fine with a round robin style of if you want to implement something formal. But I think we already do that, honestly. And here's the other thing. everybody does have a chance to talk because Jonathan allows that and he does that, but you can't make people talk.
No.
If somebody doesn't want to say something, they're not going to say it. And that should be fine too. But I think that practice has always been on our board. There's never been a time where, you know, he said, no, you can't say that, or, you know, you can't do that, or whatever. There's always been a time where he said, you know, yeah, who wants to, does anybody else have anything to say? And, you know, then if there's nothing, then he moves on. So, you know, if you want to be formal, we can do a round robin. We can go down the list, right? You know, just to make it, you know, more formal. But I don't know. I don't see the difference. I mean, it's just going to be more of a robotic type of behavior, which maybe we need.
Well, and it could just be a tool that he uses for himself. That is, so you just spoke up, so he would put he'd put a little notch next to, you know, Shelley. We heard from Shelley about a speaking chart or round robin or whatever you want to call it. And then he would, you know, somebody else might want to say something, and then somebody else and somebody else. And then if you wanted to say something again, he might interject and say, oh, wait, Shelley, we haven't yet had an opportunity to hear from Irv. We haven't heard from Lori yet. And so he might put a pause on you to allow somebody else to have a chance to speak before you have a chance to speak a second time. So it's more like that. It doesn't have to go down a list. It's more of a tool to ensure that everybody has a chance to be heard.
So I think these online Zoom meetings have forced us to do that even more. To raise your hand, or, you know, hit the chat button and say, I'd like to speak, or have some kind of, you know, way of doing that, and have grace and, you know, patience for, you know, waiting a couple of more seconds, you know, to let people chime in. Mm-hmm. I think we've worked very hard on that. And I think that I think we're getting better at it because of Zoom. For sure.
Yeah, there's purposes to different kinds of meetings too. And so when you're in a work session, they're generally less formal. And people just kind of chime in and say things as they feel appropriate. And then you get into more of a business meeting, and it's much more structured. There was a time, I think I might have shared this with you guys, that we adopted a practice for a whole year. Nobody got to speak at all until they got the permission of the chair. So talk about a strict, you know, just going down a list. Superintendent, nobody could speak until they got the permission of the chair. And we instituted that for a whole year, and it was purposeful, and it served us well. And we got our board meetings back under control. And then we were able to go back to a more relaxed process. So you have tools at your disposal to ensure that every voice can be heard. And a lot of that falls on the role of the chair. So yes, Lori, I saw your hand up. I can only see 4 people at a time, but I noticed that.
It's hard with the grid. Now, Renee, when this occurred, was it brought to the whole board and they discussed it and thought it would be a good idea to do that and see?
Yes.
Okay, and so the whole board got to discuss it and decide this would be, you know, that would be the prudent thing to do, in my opinion, to bring it to the board and have full discussion and say, yeah, let's give this a try. Let's see how this works for us.
Yeah, we adopted it purposefully. And like I said, it lasted for a year, and, you know, we agreed. And so, and I was chair that year. So that was a lot of fun. Having to manage such a strict meeting after about 6 years of them being much relaxed, you know, so a completely different protocol. But it's, you know, it's totally your own choices on how to do this, how you want to run your meetings. So I thought that when I was going through the really old slides, like I said, I pulled up these slides from Betsy Miller Jones, and, you know, this is this is board work, how the board should be spending your time is in these different areas. And then I think, you know what, that looks an awful lot like, that looks an awful lot like this. The focus framework where you're doing the same kinds of work, because she didn't know about this research at the time she was doing this. And I was working with a board last week. I think it was last Monday night. Yeah, it was. And they saw this. To them, it seemed like for the very first time. I have a hard time believing it was the first time they saw it, but they reacted like it was the first time that they had seen this framework. And this area being discussed, and what are the, using this kind of as a template for their decision making. It was like, wow, this, I thought most boards knew that this was their board work already. And interesting enough, this came out of the Lighthouse research, which was kind of the foundation of more research going forward on school boards and the effect of school boards in student achievement, which I did hear came up in your purpose statement. But it also ties to this. This is your guys' self-assessment, your board self-assessment that you took a year ago that we reviewed last fall with all of you. And these are the same 5 areas. So how are you doing in your conduct and ethics? That first thing, you were saying that 15% of your time you are always doing those things that fall within the conduct and ethics. 38% of the time you are always doing work around setting expectations and vision for the district. 31% of the time you're creating those always creating the conditions for success. 32% of the time you recognize that you are holding the system accountable, and 21% you are always involved in work of advocacy and communication with the district. Now, the most of the time are good as well. I don't want to denigrate that, and the some of the time, but this was your own assessment of yourselves a year ago on how you are performing as a board. It might be beneficial for you to take it again and compare 2019 to 2020. It's free to take the survey, and it's free to get the aggregate report here where all 69 questions and all 22 benchmarks are compressed into one-page report. If you want the detailed report, we can arrange for you to get that too if you're interested. So I thought that, it would just be nice to point it out to you guys that in your meetings, you are mostly doing this work. There's very little red, which is never, and a little bit of, I don't know, particularly in number 3, the standard number 3, you weren't sure there. And that might've just been because some of you, Janet, Lori, you were still particularly newer to the board when you took this in the fall of 2019. You just got elected in July of 2019. Well, started serving in July of 2019. So I just thought that when we look at what board work is, this is how you're doing on that. So with your agendas, they need to reflect your priorities, because that's what you're saying is important in that particular meeting. And it's how you define what your work is. So if you look back at that list, I'm going to email to you the purpose statements that you all came up with. Your agendas should reflect that. All of those things on that list, all of, your priorities, that your purposes, they should be reflected there in your agendas. So we have been at this for 1 hour and 15 minutes and really great conversation. Do we need a little bathroom break or something? And then we'll be sure I wrap up by 9 o'clock. How are you guys doing?
I'm personally fine either way, but I'm open to other people's needs.
See, you just opened it up to everybody. You always do that. You're very good at it. I'd like to take a little break if that's possible.
I would like 5 minutes if we can have 5.
Yeah. You got it. 5
Okay.
it is. It's 8:16 on my watch, so 8:21.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
5 minutes.
All right. Good job, you guys. It's 8:21 and it looks like everybody is back. I don't know what it is about these virtual meetings. My cheeks get so red, so hot. I don't know if it doesn't do it during the day when I'm sitting in the same room. Oh, and I train at night. Oh, I don't know what that's about. So I'm so glad that you were able to come back, and we have, you know, a little about 40 minutes left. And honestly, I have 70 slides, and we're not going to get through all 70 slides. Boy, I saw your head turn quick, Janet, with that one. But I want to make sure that I address, and I think that I have a little bit, maybe not so much Jonathan's concerns when we were talking about symptoms of ineffective meetings, when Jonathan, you were talking about circular or repetitive meetings, but items not on the agenda, and they just kind of come up, finding a time to discuss those. We touched on that a little bit with the parking lot to put onto future agendas. And then people being able to speak freely without a constraint. I think the only constraint you need to put on yourselves is a recognition of time. And some boards limit by agreement, like we limited our conversation that you can't talk unless you get the permission of the chair. But some boards put limits on debate and how long they're willing to go back and forth and talk about a subject that may or may not be controversial that you're deciding on. They can do it like, you know, we're going to limit debate to 15 minutes, or we're going to limit debate to 3 minutes a person, which for you guys would be 21 minutes. So your only constraints are time and that it has to be germane. So things that people want to say needs to pertain to what is actually on the agenda, what is the discussion of the board. And those are really your only constraints. Well, that's not true. You are supposed to be civil. According to Robert's Rules of Order, you're not supposed to call each other names. You aren't supposed to be talking about people. You're supposed to be talking about the issues. You're not supposed to bring up decisions that have already been decided unless there's a specific reason to, but you aren't supposed to necessarily rehash old decisions. You made a decision, the board voted, you acted on it. You don't bring it up unless there's a real reason to reconsider it or to rescind it, but business it's done is done. And so there are some constraints, but they're not constraints like, well, we don't like you, Renee, so we're not gonna let you talk. Can't have those kind of constraints just because you don't like somebody. So the circular repetitive, I think that's just going to take some discipline. That one of the things that a presiding officer or a chair can do is when somebody has spoke to a topic, whatever the topic is, if they have spoken to it, then the chair can ask if there is a differing opinion, perspective, viewpoint, rather than just, hey, who wants to talk? Does anybody have anything that they want to say? Because the idea behind this is to ferret out all the different points of view that can factor into a decision-making process. So, so the chair can say, okay, we've heard this, we've heard this statement, we've had this opinion. Who has a differing opinion, a differing perspective? And then if you agree with somebody, you don't need to say, I agree, and then just say it all over again, what somebody else has just said. That's an inefficient use of your time, and it can then get into that circular, repetitive, we're all saying the same thing. I agree with Shelley. That's all you need to say. I agree with Irv. That's all you need to say. And move on. But if you have something different to say, so that's a practice that might be helpful, Jonathan, in avoiding the circular repetitive. Does anybody have something different that they would like to add to this conversation? The thing is, you should never be surprised by somebody's no vote, because the idea of the debate before voting is so that all of the points of view that a person is using to make their decisions are used to influence their fellow board members to make the decision the way they think it should be made. So I still remember the time we were voting on a charter school application, and this school had applied. They wanted to be a charter school in our district. They had gone through the whole process. The board was having the hearing on that. We were having the discussion, and time came for a vote, and one of my board members voted no. And to this day, I don't know why. And whatever it was that influenced her to vote no on that charter school, she did not speak up during the debate time to try and influence the rest of us to her no decision. And maybe her reasons were really good and the rest of us totally missed out on that. So my telling that story is that a no vote should never come as a surprise. Janet, did you have something you wanted to say?
Am I right in understanding that you should never abstain unless there's a clear conflict of interest or some compelling reason that you cannot vote? Because I see people use it when they're stuck and they can't decide, or they feel uncomfortable, or it's a hard decision, or it's a publicly unpopular decision, and so they abstain. So can you lend a little bit of clarity to that?
Yeah, so the state statute is pretty clear that it expects board members to vote on items before the board. That's how school boards in Oregon make decisions, is by voting. And so people voted for you to be on the school board with the expectation that you would then vote on business. And so that's your expectation, is to vote. To not vote, there generally needs to be a really good reason why you're not voting. And the number one reason is an actual conflict of interest. So, and in Oregon, when we talk about conflicts of interest, our ethic laws are all about money. So it's a conflict of whether you are going to financially benefit from the decision that's being made, or you may be financially hurt from a decision that's being made. And therefore you shouldn't be a part of the decision because it's going to impact you personally, financially.
Okay.
And the potential conflicts of interest need to be declared. Like, well, I'm not going to directly be impacted, but my kid might be, or whatever. There's a potential for a conflict of interest here, and I need to just declare that, but you can still vote if it's only potential. If it's actual, you should abstain. But you're right, Janet. It's tough. One of the things that happened to me because of 9.5 years on board services, I got pretty tough skin. I got pretty thick skin. And I used to be cry the drop of a hat, kind of a pushover, and 9.5 years on my school board is like, whatever. Once I decide on something, I've offended half the people. And so I just have to learn to live with that decision. And so, yeah, you have to make the tough decisions and then live with them. Lori, did you?
Yeah, I was wondering to what Janet said, let's say that you wouldn't directly benefit, but let's say indirectly you could. Do you then leave it to the board to decide whether or not you should vote? Or should you just say, I abstain for this reason? Or because of a conflict of, is that a conflict of interest even in a slight way?
So there are definite legal terms for conflict of interest and potential conflict of interest.
Okay.
And an actual conflict of interest, you will have some kind of a financial impact. Either you will benefit financially from the decision being made, or you can be hurt financially from the decision being made. Therefore, you should stay out of the decision. Correct. You declare an actual conflict of interest, you do not participate in the discussion, and you do not vote. If it's a potential conflict of interest, you need to declare that according to Oregon ethic laws. So you just need to say, hey, there's a potential here, and I need to declare that I have a potential conflict of interest, but the law allows one with a potential conflict to still engage in discussion and to still vote. So the board doesn't get to decide if you vote or not. The law has already made that decision.
Excellent. Thank you.
Our ethics training coming up might address that because we're having the Oregon Ethics Commission come in.
Very good. Yes, they are the authority on all of that. And so I'm glad you're going to get some direct answers from them. Hope you find it really, really useful. Okay, so I think that I addressed your 3 concerns. I want to there are a few things in the slides that I wanted to be sure that I pointed out. I don't want to necessarily go through all 71 slides. You guys have already figured out that your agenda isn't final until the board agrees to it. That is final. You did that tonight. Handling board member general comments and concerns, though, sounds like, have we talked about that enough, or are there still some questions about that? Do you still have that piece on your agenda for board member comments or whatever towards the end?
So, I think that was something that was standard practice for our regular meetings, and it was less standard for our work sessions. And I believe that the plan moving forward was that would kind of stay the same way. Like the regular meetings would always have board reports and some other topics, kind of items, and that the work sessions were more tailored towards specific, more in-depth conversations. But I'm curious if everybody feels that way about it.
I personally feel that if somebody feels the need to share something, I don't know why we can't allow that. And I think a good case in point, and unfortunately he's not here, but Tom was talking about the impact of students with COVID and about how it's going to impact them personally. And he just kind of spoke, and I don't think there was really any, I don't think there was any slot on the agenda for that, but it was towards the end. And he was just kind of sharing his heaviness with that. And I thought that was it was very tender and appropriate. And it may not have been on the agenda, but I felt it was timely.
Renee, I'm curious what you think about that. My concern broadly is that it opens the door to the harder question of which of those 4 quadrants does the topic fall into? And if there's perhaps difference of opinion on where it falls, then you create the possibility of having some challenges. It wasn't on the agenda, now you're going down a path and you have to wonder, and I wondered that very night in the case Lori's talking about. Hence the concern I have with sort of the idea of being open-ended, right? Can anybody just bring up kind of whatever's on their mind? And I think there's some challenges there for sure.
Yeah, the general consensus anymore is that it's probably not a best practice to have just an open-ended talk about whatever is on a board member's mind for a lot of the reasons that you just mentioned. It is helpful to, at the end of the meeting, kind of tap in and say, is there anything we need to put on a future agenda? And allow people to say, hey, yeah, I'd like to talk about, the impact of COVID on our students or whatever the case may be. Or I just want to make sure that branch that kind of got started tonight, that, we kind of started getting off. I love that example, Lori. I loved it. It was great. But that, we started to get off track. I just want to state again, I would like to see that brought up on an upcoming agenda. And then it also takes a lot of discipline if you're going to use this kind of a process to keep it to general uplifting kind of comments. Like when we had schools that we were assigned to that we went to every month that were our schools. And I would share things about my school. Like, hey, I was at Margaret Scott Elementary School and I learned this about that, what was happening there. So real short, general kind of comments. Shelley.
I just wanted to chime in a little bit on the other ideas at the end of the meeting. And Jonathan is right. It's always been just a part of the agenda in our regular board meetings, but not so much in the work session. Excuse me. Excuse me. And I think that, we're making this a lot harder than it is. I really, really have to say that. The other items, has always been, in my recollection, has always been something that, most of the time, nobody says anything. But there is one of those, there, every once in a while you get oh yeah, I have something, to say. And that was a perfect example of what Tom did in our September meeting. It was absolutely not on the agenda. We had this whole discussion about, approving the agenda beforehand. And, we had this whole conundrum happen with the approval of the agenda, and you can't go off of it. And, if you do, your point of order and, I did bring that up to Jonathan in a separate conversation. And I said, I almost brought up a point of order when Tom brought up that question at the end, because it wasn't on the agenda and he did make a motion to change the agenda. But you know what? What was more important was the topic that he brought up. That was more important than pinpointing and nailing and saying, you can't do that, you can't do that. His topic was very important. It was about the students. It was about the environment that we're in right now. It was about how the teachers are feeling in this COVID environment and the educational environment that we're learning in. And I thought, no way, I'm not gonna stop that, because this is what board work is all about. This is a part of what board work is about, is to have that flexibility a little bit, to say, hey, Scott, I have a question for you. My wife's a teacher and she's having the hardest, went on and on. It was so good. And we all listened very intently and they had a great conversation. That's what I want to see our board do. That's where I want to see our board get to, is the respect and the level of courtesy that if a board member has a question like that or wants to talk about that in other items, that's what brings us together and allows us to be human as board members, and not inflicting all of these, your point of order, and you're like, oh my God, okay, God, what did I do wrong? Wait, hold on. This is so much harder this is just making it so much harder than it really has to be.
And that was part of how I felt. I'm sorry, I thought you were done.
I am. I don't know. This is exhausting. Doing all of these little nitty bitty things and poking and, it's like, geez, can we just do board work? Can we just come together and do our work in public? And do it together? I don't know.
Yes, I think you can, and I think you are, and I think you're moving that way. And I felt some of that too. I thought, you guys are making this harder on yourselves than you need to be.
Yeah.
You're handcuffing yourselves in ways that you don't need to handcuff yourself. But there has to be an element of trust, and there has to be procedures that you can agree to.
Agree.
And then everybody needs to follow through those procedures. Jennifer, I saw your hand up.
I have a couple of things that maybe I'll
raise. The one question that I had is that you asked us about what we thought the purpose of the board was. Did you get
Mhm.
all of our responses? Was that what you did at the beginning of the meeting? Because you stopped halfway through.
I thought that I captured them here.
Okay.
And I was going to take a screenshot of that and I'll send that to Debbie in a screenshot so that you have those statements. And I tried to capture them by who said them.
Okay, that's fine. I just thought that you had asked a slightly different question midway and wanted a different response, but that's okay. I get that you were just referring back to that. So the question was up about, Jonathan asked about the end of the meeting. I really think it is important at the end of the meeting, and I think we already do it. It's like, is there any other business? You know, that's the question that's asked, and that's when you can have a chance to say something about an upcoming agenda item. I do think it's important to be able to say it in public instead of just passing it along privately. I think that that's super important. And we do have the opportunity for board reports during our general meeting. And I think that that is kind of what Renee was talking about, making it upbeat and positive and having to do with things that are district related, and I think that's been a great practice. And then I also just wanted to say that I think that process is important. When it's predictable, then we can build trust, but the process has to be predictable.
Yes, amen. Thank you, Jennifer. And that's
Oh,
kind
and
of what
one
I'm
more
trying
thing.
to get to. Yes.
Like if we're going to bring something up, at the end of the meeting, I was just thinking about the no surprises hashtag that we've been working on. I think that would be, you maybe can't always do that. Maybe there's something, but that would be a nice thing to be able to, pass that on to the superintendent or the board chair saying, this is, I do want to bring this up. And that just helps. It gives an opportunity for another conversation to happen, I think, about, oh, we were going to have that on this next, or, like whatever. It gives it another opportunity to say, oh yeah, this person was talking about that too. So anyway, just a thought to throw out there.
Right. And I think that the process and the predictability is important, and having a conversation about what you want your processes to be will help you. And then in time, they will become predictable and you can rely on them and you can trust that everybody is going to behave accordingly. And it makes a big difference. And then things change and you might have to adopt a year of really strict, nobody gets to talk unless they have the permission of the chair type of a practice if it's necessary. So
Renee, what was happening before that? You said that, I can't remember the word that you used, but things were not going well.
Well, we were more afraid that things were not going to go well. So there was an election. Actually, before the election, we had a vacancy on the board and we had 2 individuals apply for the vacancy. And one of the individuals was a really strong personality and kind of a forceful individual, and we didn't appoint him. But he ran for election and he won, and we knew he was coming. And so we knew we were going to have to put some practices in place until we could trust. And so we adopted this process of nobody gets to speak until they got the permission of the chair. And so then when he was sworn in, we said, this is how we do our business. And he agreed and everybody else agreed. And so it didn't totally manage things. There were times when he had a writing utensil in his hand and he was leaning over the table in a physical meeting and we were adopting a curriculum, and this guy was 7 feet tall and he was doing like this and kind of lecturing the committee that was making the curriculum adoption recommendation, berating them. And another board member sitting next to him pulled the pin out of his hand and he went and realized that he had been really physically aggressive to this committee. And so then we had a practice that we would get his attention, we'd call his name and we'd say, do we need to take the pencil out of your hand? Even if he wasn't physically holding one. And that became a trigger for him to know that he was getting a little bit out of line. So we had adopted that because we knew who we were getting, not because there was anything that wasn't necessarily working well on the board. And then when he kind of learned how to play nice in the sandbox, then we could relax those practices. Dan, I think you wanted to ask a question.
Well, and that was a perfect segue. Thank you, Renee, because I wanted to bring up, I mean, that's a perfect illustration of some of what I observed. And I think if I could also piggyback on what Shelley had talked about in relation to, you know, Tom's comments at that meeting, and Shelley exercising some discretion to not point of order because she felt like what was being added or what was being said was value added to a conversation. But in your situation, I guess the point of order, as I recollect from when it was kind of started to insert itself, was, and I also like the illustration of the tree. That's a great one, Lori. I'm going to start using that one too, where something branches off. So do you have any recommendations for the board members to, you know, how do you, and it's always tough in these situations where Shelley exercises some discretion because I think this is important to hear, or somebody else feeling like this limb is starting to, not only is it a limb, it's starting to lean, and someone wanting to bring the conversation back to saying, hey, let's put that on the parking lot and let's get that to the parking lot without offending somebody. And I think the point of order was an attempt to do that, but then it just comes, it feels like a reprimand.
Yeah.
So again, it really kind of pretty much falls on the chair, which, you know, so being a chair of a school board is not for the faint of heart. And it really falls on the chair to run an orderly meeting and to be keeping track of everything that's going on, which is part of why I wanted to sit at the end so I could see all the body language and see everything that was happening without having to turn my head constantly and feel like I was in a ping pong match. But keeping track of the conversation and then, you know, interjecting with, well, I see this conversation is starting to stray. We have a branch growing here. Let's Debbie, can you note this and let's put this on our list. Or the chair saying, the proper terminology according to parliamentary procedure is the member will kindly ensure their comments are germane. So if we're starting to get off topic, just basically reminding everybody, hey, we need to keep this germane. But if the chair doesn't do it, isn't monitoring what is happening and what's going on, then the vice chair can certainly step in and help with that and say, hey, I think we're getting off track here a little bit. Let's bring our conversation back in. I think the way that can make it less feeling attacking, like somebody's being shut down, you know, personally, is to not make it about the person, but make it really about the topic. And say, our topic is starting to stray. Jonathan?
Ultimately, I think the challenge is that that's ultimately subjective, right? And so that's when I think we run into a challenge as a group, is because if, I'll just pick on me, if I were to say, you know what, I think we're kind of straying, can we put this on the parking lot? If somebody was offended or put off by that, where does that go, right? Ultimately, does it have to get to the point where we go through the point of order and a motion to try to move us off? I mean, that's where I felt like we'd been at a few different times when it doesn't even matter what the issue was, but there's been a few times it's felt that way. And I'm not quite sure how to navigate it, right? I don't run boards for a living. I do it as a volunteer, right? It's not something that I, necessarily super good at figuring out, okay, how do we navigate this awkward moment and what's the right step?
right. And that is hard, and I certainly can appreciate that, Jonathan, and thank you for being so honest. So any of you who think you want to be the board chair, just kind of remember this conversation, this 2-hour conversation tonight. But ultimately, all decisions belong to the body, belong to the board. And so it is completely appropriate for the chair to say, I think we're starting to stray. This is a topic that's not on our agenda. I don't think that it's germane to what we've been discussing. And let's move our conversation back to the topic at hand. And if somebody disagrees with you, they can just say, I disagree, and I'd like to put this to the board to decide. And at that point, then rather than you, Jonathan, by yourself making a decision, which you have rights to do. So the ruling of the chair stands whenever the chair declares something so, it's so unless the body disagrees. And so if you say a topic isn't germane and we're straying, well, that's true unless they disagree with you. And it doesn't have to be through point of order. It can just be through, I disagree, and I would like to bring this to the board to decide. And then at that point, they can then follow that up with, I move that we continue to discuss X, Y, and Z. And so I noticed tonight when Shelley brought up her request to add an item to the agenda, there was a little bit of a pause before there was a second that was brought forward. So Jonathan, as a chair, shouldn't have to ask for a second.
Thank you.
And a second means that people want to discuss and eventually vote on whatever is being brought before the body to decide. So if Jonathan waits long enough and nobody seconds it, motions die right there for a lack of second. So you don't have to wait for him to ask. You can just say second. All that means is, yes, I want to discuss this, and yes, I eventually want to vote on it. You can even disagree with, you like Shelley's idea tonight, or Shelley's proposal to add to the agenda. You could have disagreed with it. You all voted yes, but you could have disagreed with it and still seconded it, because a second doesn't mean agreement. A second means I want to discuss this and eventually vote on it. So if you are, Jonathan, trying to tactfully and politely say, hey, our conversation is straying, we're getting off topic, this is our agenda item, I just want to bring everybody's attention back that this is what we're talking about, and pull our attention back. And we'll put this on the parking lot, and Irv wants to disagree with you. He can speak up and say, nope, no, I disagree. I would like to keep talking about this. Let's ask the rest of the board. I move that we continue the conversation around such and such. Then if the rest of you want, second that, any one of you second that, and then you just vote on whether or not you continue the conversation. Does that help, Jonathan?
Yes,
Does
thank
that
you.
help for the rest of you?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Because a point of order usually means somebody's doing something wrong, and it needs corrected. And Jonathan pointing out that the conversation is straying is not doing something wrong. He's doing his job as a chair to preside over the meeting and ensure that the meeting is progressing as planned, as you all agreed to at the beginning of the night when you adopted the agenda. And he's just making sure that you guys all get through that, and trying to help you stay on track. Lori?
Yeah, I was wondering about emails and stuff when they're extended to other board members. Are there any decorums, policies because I think one of the things too is like responding to someone in a timely manner, but also having that level of decorum where it doesn't become combative or accusatory. I was wondering if there is something out there that OSBA has that would be a good rubric to work from.
So you have this policy that I'm sharing on the screen about your board meetings. And you have inside of this policy in item number 2, I'm scrolling down on my screen here to get you to item number 2, which is communication outside of board meetings. So this is email to, by and among board members. So this is not emails with the public. This is emails between board members. And you have already decided by this policy how you are going to do email to, by, and among a quorum of board members. So it's already there. You already have the rules. You shall not be used for the purpose of discussing district business. You have said that your email communications among board members will be limited to messages not involving deliberation, debate, decision-making, or gathering information on which to deliberate. But you say they can contain agenda item suggestions, reminders of meetings. Hey, remember, October 26th, we got a training with OSBA, 7 to 9. You can send information about meeting agendas and items on there. Oh, here's some information on this agenda item. Please be sure to read it. That's kind of like your packet. You can send one-way information from board members or from the superintendent to each board member, like, hey, here's an article I found. I want to share it with all of you. Make sure you copy Debbie on those so that she can retain that as a part of the record. So if it comes up at a meeting, she can say, hey, here's that article that Lori was referring to. And then if people have posed questions from the community, you can respond to those subject to other limitations in board policy. So you would have to look at where you have other limitations. So you already have some rules, Lori, about email to, by, and among board members, and you have your communication agreements that you adopted that talked about how you are going to communicate with one another. And that also includes email, because you were going to email either the chair or the superintendent, but you weren't going to according to that, unless you change your agreement, you weren't going to necessarily email both of them.
Very good. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. So oftentimes our answers are in policies and we just don't know that, and we don't know which ones to go look at, which is why at OSBA, we really recommend that board members know the B section, the AB section pretty well, because most of the answers about your meetings and how you should conduct yourselves as members of this board and how the board collectively does its work is outlined in that B section. The other one to know really well is KL, the other policy to know really well. And then the next one to know really well is your policy CBA, which is the duties and responsibilities of the superintendent, so that you are being sure that what you have delegated to the superintendent, you're supporting him to be able to do that work. Like a lot of you talked about, the purpose for your meetings is to support the superintendent, and so that you don't try and do his work. It's not uncommon for school boards to try and be quasi superintendents, that they want to step in and try and solve the problems of the district. That's why you hired Scott, is to run the district.
Right.
But board members tend to slip into that without even realizing it. So the CBA is another good policy to be familiar with. So it's 9 o'clock. I promised you I wouldn't go through 70 slides, and I didn't. I got through like 14 slides out of the 70.
Amazing.
But I do think this was a conversation that you needed to have. And
can I ask you one last question?
Of course, Jennifer, it's your time.
It is. You mentioned that last time that in the discussion about agenda topics, you said a good place to look for agenda topics is that OSBA publication, the calendar that we paid for. Is that something that we can, like I know Debbie has it, can she distribute it to the whole board? Is that permissible?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. The district bought it and it can be shared with all of the board members. There's, how it's structured is month by month, and there's the first first part of each month talks about board responsibilities that are either required by law or recommended to engage in these things by this month. And then the rest is administrative. So there's a lot of administrative stuff, especially in August. The list is just miles long of what administrators need to do. But sure, absolutely. She can share that with you.
Thank you.
Well, I sure
So-
appreciate you coming, and I wish you the best in your new adventures, whatever those may be, Renee. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm gonna have to figure that out. So thank you very much. It's been an honor through the years to work with Silver Falls. Been working with you since I think like 2014, 2015, something like that. It's really been an honor. I wish you guys all of the best of luck, and you'll be in good hands with Sarah and the rest of the OSBA team. I am excited to retire, but I do love this work at the same time.
Thanks, Renee.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you,
you're
Renee.
welcome. You're
Happy
welcome.
retirement.
Thank you. Good luck with the rest of your meeting.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, good night.
Good night.
Okay, well, yeah, that was really good. I'm glad we had a chance to go through that. I think that, her willingness to kind of float through all of our different questions was really helpful. And as she mentioned, so there's a couple of other things that are on the list that we didn't get to at the end of the last work session, which were part of the prescriptive list for the superintendent search. My intention is to try to get that scheduled. I think it can be done in an hour, probably in the December timeframe. I'm going to find out. I think technically we have the 6 months to fit it in. They may provide us a little bit of relief since we missed a meeting due to the fires and such. So anyway, any thoughts on that? How you guys would like to prioritize the last, I'll call it hour. I'm not sure. Sometimes, as you found out, we don't finish on time, but let's assume it's an hour with Sarah on the prescriptive items. Where do you guys see that priority wise?
I guess I'd prefer to get it over with before we get slammed with a bunch of other things.
Yes, Shelley.
I would love to get that scheduled as soon as possible. I think because we're in the environment right now, we just got fresh off another training. We had a training last month, and I think the sooner we can do it, the I think more productive it could be for us. So yeah, that's my thought.
Okay. Good. Anybody disagree? Any differing opinions, as she said? Okay, I'll work with her. We'll try to get it scheduled. As you guys are well aware, we're trying to schedule the OGEC training. Actually, I believe we have now just this week scheduled the OGEC training for next month. So be on the lookout for that. And thank you. Okay, next up on the agenda, we have the
Division 22, I think it is, or is it Division 22? I don't have the agenda in front of me.
All
It's
right, Division 20
Mhm.
standard.
So how long do we want to wait for Jonathan?
Jonathan, you're freezing up a little bit.
Completely frozen.
I can go ahead if that's okay with everybody. This is a
Yeah.
yearly thing. It's a compliance thing that we have to do.
Mhm.
Every year, districts have to report out where they are with respect to the standards for public elementary and secondary schools. those Division 22 requirements have been modified because every year we report on how we did compliance-wise the year previous. And so for the 1920 school year, many of the requirements were waived due to COVID. And we have 13, and we are in compliance with all of them. We don't have to have any descriptors rectifying any non-compliant issues. The Division 22 requirements are on board book for you all to see, and it's all really straightforward. So my report to you is that we are in compliance, and that usually this takes place in February, but this year there was a November 1st due date. So this was done by Paul last year in February. And this year it's happening again, needs to be done by November 1st.
Thank you. I apologize from before. My internet actually went completely out for a little
That's
while,
okay.
but I'm back on now. So anybody have any questions for Scott on this topic? Okay. The next up is a first reading of policy ACB, which is also long. This is our first reading, and this was put together by Scott and his team as a first draft. And Scott, I'll let you explain kind of the,
Sure.
the background and all of that. So.
Sure. So as you know, we do also have a policy work group. We had our third meeting last week. Is actually a great meeting. They're 1 hour. We meet twice a month. And the only reason why I'm saying that is because this policy did not go through that group. This policy is much more time sensitive to that. This policy is a good thing. To me, it's long overdue. And this is coming straight from our state board. And then we received the policy language from OSBA. So there's been a lot of people looking at this policy, a lot of legal scholars looking at this policy. So what you see in front of you, with the exception of the equity statement that came straight out of the policy for equity, which should go in at the beginning of this policy, all students belong. The rest is OSBA's language. And so as you're reading through, just know that it wasn't written, I didn't do the writing on it. If there are things you want to change around, of course we can do that. But if we're going to start talking about taking things out or adding things in, that's going to take additional steps. And so we need to be really careful with that, because this is a policy that's being mandated by the state of Oregon. Every one of our 197 districts in Oregon will have this implemented by January 1st. In fact, next year, when I report back to you the Division 22 requirements, this will be one of them. And so what accompanies this, of course, is the ARs. And that has to do with the complaint process and all of that. And that's something Dan and I will work on after this policy is approved. So just wanted to add that in there as well.
So this is, this is our chance, right, to talk about it and share our feedback with Scott regarding this policy. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at it. And, as he said, this is somewhat prescriptive. I mean, I don't mean to sound it as though it isn't important, but it is somewhat tightly, I think, defined in terms of what it's trying to achieve and the parameters that it falls within. So, but do take a look. And if you've got things you want to talk about now, by all means.
I'm very excited that we are introducing this and that we are expected to, but I see it more as a door opener for the policy committee and for our board to look at what other policies we need in place to continually ensure the equity and inclusion needed. And so I see this as a door opener, and I think it's a good one, and I'm truly excited about it. And I look forward to more policy and to come from this for our students. So thank you.
Thanks, Laurie. Yes, Shelley.
Okay. I just want to make a quick statement. I am very, again am very happy about this as well. I do want to mention that we do have a couple of other policies, of course. JBB, our equity policy that we adopted in May, that I think can be, that's similar to this. But we also have another policy, it's JB, and it's the equal educational opportunity. And I did bring up that policy just to read it, and there's of course similar language as this, but of course there are some specific differences. And so I just wanted to say that we could potentially have 3 policies that, the ACB, this one, excuse me, my voice, JB and then JBB. And I think this is really going in the right direction to bring us up to speed with our current environment. So I'm all for it. Thank you.
Thanks, Shelley. Okay, any other thoughts or comments tonight? Anything else to share with Scott or with Dan? Okay. Well, thanks. Scott, anything else you need to share on this topic before we move on?
No, I don't think so. I think this serves as the first reading, and again, I appreciate all of you and your commitment to ensuring that this goes and is set in place smoothly, and I appreciate your support on that.
Thank you. Okay, well, our modified agenda has one more topic, and it was other topics, but specifically Shelley was hoping to make a statement. So this is that opportunity, Shelley.
Great, thank you so much. I just wanted to make just a little summary since I wasn't able to make the last meeting on October 12th. And this is my summary. I want to thank the community members for coming to speak at public comment on October 12th, 2020. Sharing your stories and experiences with us allows us to continue to understand what is happening in our educational environment. I take it to mind and heart, and I will be following up with our superintendent, Scott Drew, to discuss. I would also like to thank the board for passing the K-5 reconfiguration plan for Mark Twain and Robert Frost. I too support this philosophy and also believe it is in the best interest of our students on multiple different levels of their growth and development. Thank you to Scott and the committee that brought this together, and I look forward to moving forward with this process. I'd like to thank Michelle Stadley from SFEA and Michelle Livingston from OSEA for their update. It is a welcome standing agenda item, and I look forward to hearing from them in the months to come. I was happy to hear the discussion about parliamentary procedure that Director McLaughlin introduced. I support this idea to implement into our practices as a board to continue to establish better working relationships amongst our group. Extending the budget committee application and selection process was a great decision, as you all know how I feel about that, to allow our community members to submit their applications. I encourage anyone with experience to apply. With new leadership at our helm, this is a great opportunity to share your knowledge and be heard. Thank you to Steve Nielsen for his very detailed information regarding enrollment numbers and PERS. And I want to also, I didn't have the opportunity to submit my evaluation for Mr. Drew. And I just wanted to make a short statement about that. The words that come to mind for me, having worked with Scott Drew these past few months, is intelligence, honesty, creativity, confident, driven, and courageous. He is a true leader who knows how to incorporate many of these attributes and more into a system that can be otherwise a bit challenging. You are exactly what we needed to take us into the next chapter of this district. Well done, and keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you, Shelley. As the topic that we added was somewhat broad, called other topics, does anybody else have anything you want to bring up tonight for the good of the order? Okay. Well, thank you.
See everybody
Without,
Thursday.
yes, that's right. Good reminder. Thank you. Yes, the group dynamics training on Thursday at 5, right? 5 o'clock.
5 o'clock, you don't need to bring your laptops or anything like that. You just need to bring something to write on, because we'll be sitting in chairs, but there won't be tables. There's a
Okay.
reason for that.
Thank you.
We'll have you out of there by 8:30 sharp.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a
Thank
great
you.
evening. And
Bye,
we'll talk
everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.